It is the night of February 12, 2026. Along Russia's Black Sea coast, the port of Taman moves through another routine shift. Sodium lights humming, cranes idle against the dark, fuel tanks standing in silent rows. For nearly 4 years of war, this place has lived with something the cities closer to the front lost long ago: distance from the noise. Here, war usually arrives as paperwork and shipping manifests, not explosions. Taman sits deep in Russia's Krasnodar region, a critical logistics hub feeding fuel into the broader military machine. Night crews move methodically along the catwalks, checking valves, watching the cold water of the Kerch Strait slide against the piers. The rhythm is procedural, predictable, safe. Or at least, it has felt that way. But modern warfare has a way of rewriting geography. Somewhere above the Black Sea, beyond the reach of casual observation, a long-range drone is already on approach. It has crossed hundreds of miles of dark water, threading through radar gaps with quiet precision. It is not looking for headlines, it is looking for impact. Seconds later, the illusion of distance collapses. The drone dives into the primary fuel storage array, and the night over Taman erupts in fire. What burns in the port is more than fuel. It is the idea that the rear is still out of reach. To understand why this fire matters, we must look beyond the flames. We must look at the map. Ports like Taman are not chosen randomly by strike planners. They are the arteries of the Russian war effort. The fuel stored here does not stay here. It is pumped into rail cars. It is loaded onto tankers. It moves across the strait into Crimea. It flows north to the airfields where bombers launch their missiles. It flows west to the tanks digging into the frozen mud of the front. Every gallon of diesel burning in that tank is a gallon that will not power a T-90 tank in Donetsk. This war has trained both sides to treat infrastructure as the ultimate form of leverage. For 4 years, the conflict has been a grinding contest of endurance. Can Ukraine keep the lights on? Can Russia keep the trains moving? By striking Taman, Ukraine is demonstrating that the Russian logistical chain is not an endless, unbreakable loop. It is fragile. It can be snapped. When fire touches a system like this, even for a few hours, it introduces a virus into the network: doubt. Insurance companies in London look at the satellite photos and raise their rates. Captains of neutral ships look at the smoke and decide to anchor further out. The smooth flow of supplies turns into a stutter, and in a war of attrition, a stutter in logistics can be as deadly as a breakthrough on the front line. While the fire crews in Taman are spraying foam onto the burning tanks, a very different scene is unfolding 1,500 miles away. The city of Geneva, Switzerland is quiet. The streets are clean. The air is cold and still. Inside the secure conference rooms of the diplomatic district, aides are preparing for the arrival of high-level delegations. Diplomats are scheduled to meet on February 17th and 18th. The agenda is heavy. Territorial control, security guarantees, the exchange of prisoners, the protection of critical infrastructure. There is no smoke here. There is only the rustle of paper and the hushed tones of advisors drafting position statements. This creates a surreal, split-screen reality. On one side of the continent, metal is melting. On the other, language is being refined. But these two worlds are not separate. They are deeply intertwined. History teaches us that violence rarely stops before a negotiation. In fact, it often accelerates. Why? Because leverage is not built in silence. Neither side wants to walk into that conference room looking weak. Neither side wants to sit down at the table with a hand that looks empty. Ukraine strikes Taman to show that its reach is undiminished, that it can still hurt Russia deep in its own territory. Russia strikes back to show that its resilience is intact, that it can absorb the blow and keep moving. The diplomats in Geneva know this. They know that the briefing papers they are holding are being rewritten in real time by the events on the ground. The fire in Taman is not an interruption of the peace process. It is a part of it. It is the violent preamble to the dialogue. But there is a third player in this drama: the civilian population. While Taman burns and Geneva talks, the people of Odessa are living in the dark. In Ukraine's southern port city, the war has reshaped the very rhythm of existence. Following retaliatory Russian drone strikes, the city is grappling with yet another wave of infrastructure disruptions. For the residents here, this is not a headline event. It is a Tuesday. Walk through the streets of Odessa tonight, and you will hear the soundtrack of modern war. It isn't gunfire. It is the hum of thousands of gasoline generators vibrating on balconies and sidewalks. The electricity is gone. The water pressure is low. The internet flickers in and out. Families have recalibrated their lives around the schedule, the few hours a day when the grid might turn on. They charge their phones, wash their clothes, and cook their meals in frantic bursts of activity before the darkness returns. This is the human cost of the strategy we are analyzing. When we talk about infrastructure pressure points, we are talking about unheated apartments. We are talking about surgeons operating by flashlight. We are talking about children doing homework by candlelight. The strikes on both sides, the burning port in Russia, the darkened city in Ukraine, reveal a brutal symmetry that defines this phase of the conflict. It is a war of mirror images, drone for drone, grid for grid. Russia tries to freeze Ukraine into submission. Ukraine tries to burn Russia's wallet. Both populations absorb the disruption. Both societies have learned to endure. And that mutual endurance is perhaps the most surprising factor of the last 4 years. How was the strike on Taman achieved? This wasn't a simple mortar shell lobbed over a fence. This was a complex aerospace operation. To hit a target that far behind enemy lines, the Ukrainian drone had to navigate a gauntlet of air defenses. The Russian south is protected by the S-400 Triumph, the Pantsir S-1, and layers of electronic warfare jammers designed to scramble GPS signals. For a drone to survive this environment, it cannot just fly straight. It has to be smart. Analysts suggest the strike likely involved waypoint navigation. The drone doesn't fly a direct line. It hugs the coast. It dips into river valleys. It flies at nap-of-the-earth altitudes, sometimes as low as 50 feet, to hide in the radar clutter of the waves. It may have used terminal guidance, an onboard AI that recognizes the shape of the oil tanks visually, ignoring the GPS jamming that usually protects such sites. The fact that it penetrated the airspace of a strategic port just days before a major diplomatic summit is a failure of Russian air defense. But more importantly, it is a statement of Ukrainian capability. If you can hit Taman, you can hit Novorossiysk. If you can hit the fuel tanks, you can hit the loading docks. The threat creates a risk tax on every Russian operation in the Black Sea. They now have to dedicate more radars, more missiles, and more men to protect the rear, stripping those resources from the front. As the calendar turns toward February 24th, the weight of history begins to press down on the conflict. It has been 4 years since the full-scale invasion began. 4 years since the columns of tanks rolled toward Kyiv. The war has evolved from a battle of maneuver into a battle of systems. European defense budgets have completely recalibrated. Energy markets that panicked in 2022 have now adjusted with practiced caution. NATO's posture in Eastern Europe has shifted from reassurance to permanent reinforcement. For the United States and its European partners, the timing of these strikes is delicate. Additional military aid packages are being rushed to Kyiv before the anniversary. Air defense systems to protect Odessa. Long-range drones to strike Taman. This aid carries a political message. Providing assistance right before negotiations alters the psychological terrain. It reassures Kyiv that they do not stand alone at the table. It signals to Moscow that Western patience has not evaporated, that the Ukraine fatigue they were banking on has not resulted in a collapse of support. But inside the donor countries, the debates are fierce. Questions surface about sustainability, about objectives, about what a victory actually looks like after 4 years of grinding attrition. These are not simple debates. They unfold across legislatures and ministries. And every visible strike, every burning tank in Taman, every darkened street in Odessa, shapes that argument. So where do we stand? We are looking at 3 environments operating simultaneously. The tactical, the fire crews in Taman, fighting to keep the port open. The repair teams in Odessa, splicing cables in the freezing cold. The strategic, the generals moving assets, calculating fuel reserves, and planning the spring campaigns. The diplomatic, the advisors in Geneva, parsing the language of ceasefires and security guarantees. The unpredictability of the next few weeks comes from the overlap of these three worlds. If the talks in Geneva gain momentum, the strike on Taman might be remembered by historians as the last flare-up before a de-escalation, a final punch thrown before the bell rings. But if the negotiations stall, if the positions are too far apart, if the trust is too broken, then Taman is not an ending. It is a preview. It is a preview of a war that shifts increasingly towards strategic infrastructure. A war where the front line is everywhere. The most decisive battles of 2026 are not always visible on satellite maps. Many unfold somewhere quieter, inside briefing rooms, inside risk calculations, inside the minds of leaders trying to judge how much pressure the other side can really absorb. They play out in whether populations believe the cost is still bearable, and whether the global economy can keep cushioning the shock. Infrastructure strikes operate in that gray zone. They rarely decide wars overnight, but they do something more subtle. They shake confidence. They test repair speed. They probe the resilience of the state itself, without crossing thresholds that would trigger uncontrollable escalation. That is why a port fire just days before negotiations carries weight far beyond the flames. Not because the oil was lost, that can be replaced, but because the strike demonstrated continuity of capability, of intent, and of pressure at the exact moment diplomacy is supposed to take the lead. As the anniversary approaches, the world is watching two timelines at once: fire over the Black Sea, power disruptions in Odessa, and diplomats quietly refining language in Geneva. War and negotiation running in parallel. No clear resolution yet visible, only motion. And if you're finding this breakdown valuable, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. It really helps support the mission here. Because the flames in Taman will fade, the lights in Odessa will return, and the delegations in Geneva will eventually walk out, with a deal or with nothing. But the machinery behind this war does not switch off so easily. The real question now isn't what burned, it's what comes next. Are we witnessing the violent crescendo before a negotiated pause, or the early signals of a longer, more dangerous phase? History has seen wars appear to cool, right before they shifted gears. This one may be no different. For now, the message rising from the smoke over the Black Sea is clear. The ink on any future agreement isn't dry yet, and the fuse is still burning. What do you think? Pressure toward peace, or signs of something bigger? Tell me in the comments below.